The conflict in Sudan has now been dragging on for over 9 months. It's slipped off the international headlines despite being described by the UN as one of the fastest unfolding global crises and the largest displacement crisis in the world. The UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs, the body tasked with coordinating aid responses, says around half of the total population need humanitarian assistance. Some 7.4 million people have been displaced from their homes, and there have been outbreaks of cholera and other diseases. Since the fighting began in April of last year, about 500,000 people have fled into neighbouring South Sudan, and that's one of the poorest countries in the world. Thousands more are expected to continue the exodus. Peter Kioi is the Chief of Mission for IOM, that's the UN Migration Agency, in Sudan, and he's now in the agency's temporary base in Port Sudan, which is in the east of the country on the Red Sea. Hello, Peter.
Hello.
Now, Peter, those numbers that I just mentioned, they're pretty hard to fathom. Can you give me an idea of why this conflict is so dangerous for civilians? They feel the need to go to places like South Sudan.
Thank you. I guess it is easy to understand with the poverty levels in Sudan and the fact that the humanitarian community has no capacity to oversee or access the areas where people are fleeing to or fleeing from. It makes it really difficult for us to assure the international protection rights that these beneficiaries are entitled to. We have two warring parties that are going at it for their own reasons. We are not privy, we are neutral, but we still do not have access. We've been advocating for humanitarian access to be able to support these beneficiaries, and lack of humanitarian aid makes them even more at risk and more vulnerable to whatever situation they find themselves in the different locations where the displacement is happening.
And we've been hearing about some horrific abuses, widespread rights violations in places across the country. So Darfur, Kordofan, and even the capital, Khartoum, still going on. Have you been receiving these reports as well?
We have been receiving these reports. Again, as I said, it's difficult for us to get there, to bring the necessary support to the victims due to the fact that access remains one of the key issues and advocacy points for the humanitarian community in Sudan. We need more access and more secure access for humanitarian actors, which for now still remains one of the biggest issues in Sudan.
Now, the situation is obviously very dangerous for UN workers, as you said, that they have these huge access problems. We're getting reports as well of loaded trucks full of aid that can't move because the fighting is so fierce. Drivers of those trucks being beaten, extorted for money, aid workers detained or killed. So in those kind of very dangerous situations, do you still have people on the ground? Are they able to achieve anything at all, or is it just too dangerous?
For now, some areas we don't have people because it's too dangerous. Others, I think, as we follow the progress in Sudan, the humanitarian space is shrinking due to access. Just recently, the conflict reached the Al Jazeera state and the White Nile state, which meant that humanitarian actors had to move out, had to be evacuated out of those localities, meaning reducing more access to beneficiaries that are in need of our support. Going back to your question on the trucks, yes, access to those areas remains an impediment due to either restriction from governing bodies or restriction due to insecurity, where truck drivers do not feel secure going into some of those localities to deliver the aid. So there's a barrage of issues around access, not necessarily that prevent some of this aid from being delivered to the places it needs to get to.
And have any staff from your particular agency, the UN Migration Agency, been affected?
We've been affected. Unfortunately, I think at the onset of the crisis, we did lose one staff, but for the example of the Al Jazeera state, we had to move our staff out because of security concerns. The same thing with the White Nile state, we had to move our staff out because of security concerns. Now we're regrouping around the eastern offices that we have in Kasala, Gadaref, and Port Sudan. But for how long, we don't know. Again, RSF has mentioned on the media and pages that they're making their way east and towards Port Sudan as well. So it's only a matter of time. We do not know what the next 2 weeks, the next 2 months, we don't know how quickly they will advance, but we remain in a precarious situation where we're not sure in the next 2 weeks, will we still be here to deliver aid? Because both sides, despite agreeing during the Jeddah talks on humanitarian access, they're still not delivering on that. And this is one of the key points that we've been pushing, and hindered humanitarian access to people who are affected by the conflict.
Right, so you were evacuated from the capital, Khartoum, which is where the UN country team was before the fighting, out east to Port Sudan, which is where you are now. But you're saying that even there, by the Red Sea, you're not necessarily safe. So can you foresee a situation where you may have to evacuate from Port Sudan?
Again, we're playing with scenarios on likelihoods of what can happen if RSF makes a push north.
RSF being the party which is fighting with the government.
Yes, exactly. For now, the situation in Port Sudan remains relatively stable and calm, but it is probably a false calm because we're not sure of what is happening in the dynamics in the city, but around the city as well. So we remain vigilant. But anything, as I said, it can shift from one side, and we find ourselves again in a similar situation as Khartoum, where we have to flee the town.
Well, one of our colleagues based in New York actually moved to work with the mission in Sudan, and it was just before the attacks began. The fighting began 9 months ago, and she was telling us about what it was like for her to come under fire and be evacuated from Khartoum to Port Sudan. You weren't yourself in the country, I think, on the day that happened. But can you tell us what it was like for your colleagues in Khartoum? Just how bad was it?
I think it's a situation you would not want to find yourself in. Again, chaotic, bullets flying all over around, unable to move, constantly seeking shelter under objects, under furniture in the house, in corners, hoping that no stray bullet can come through the window. Again, everybody did not expect Khartoum would bear the brunt of the fighting. And so the necessary measures of security in Khartoum were not there. And this makes it a very scary, especially for those who had family in Khartoum with their children. It is a nightmare that no one would want to live or even wish it upon others, because you're not sure what can happen in the next 5 minutes, in the next 10 minutes. And I remember we were trying to coordinate for our staff to get to the gathering sites to coordinate the evacuation. Even that was difficult to get staff from point A to point B in Khartoum. In even the relatively calm areas, because of the number of checkpoints, be it the Rapid Support Forces checkpoints or be it the government checkpoint, which again, at the onset of the crisis, nobody is really sure how well those checkpoints are manned, how well the people will react to the staff trying to cross those checkpoints. So it was a situation of confusion, I would say. And if you mix that with the fear and the uncertainty of what is happening, it is not a good situation to be in.
And now at your temporary base, you, the UN Migration Agency, all the other agencies and bodies of the UN in Port Sudan, must be very frustrating for you not being able to offer the help that you want. And for all of you out there, what is morale like? Is it frustrated? Are you hopeful for the future? What's the feeling like there?
Again, as you said, we stayed behind to deliver, and it is a bit frustrating when you do not have access. We have the capacity, but we do not have access to the people who are in need of that support. That does become frustrating, but then we do have pockets of hope when we manage to do, for example, the cross-border support from Chad into Darfur, again, allowing us to deliver some of that vital humanitarian aid that is needed in some of those key areas that you mentioned earlier, Darfur, Kordofan, Khartoum. But it still remains a challenge, and we hope with more advocacy, with more negotiations ongoing, that greater humanitarian access can be granted to the humanitarian community at large.
Well, we're hoping that the situation improves for you and the people of Sudan. And if things change, we will be back in touch with you. Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.